Think about the last time you said yes, when everything inside you was screaming no. Maybe it was picking up extra work you didn't have the bandwidth for. Maybe it was agreeing to plans you didn't want to make. Maybe it was letting someone speak to you in a way that made you feel small, and you smiled through it and said nothing. Maybe it was something smaller, more everyday, but the feeling was the same. That quiet, heavy feeling of having betrayed yourself again. And the worst part isn't the yes. The worst part is what comes after. The slow burn of frustration. The replaying of the moment in your head. The wondering why you can never just say what you actually mean. The resentment that starts to grow, not just toward the other person, but toward yourself. If that cycle sounds familiar, this video is for you. Because what I'm going to talk about today is not a soft skill or a nice to have. It is one of the most fundamental things you can learn about how to live as a human being in relationship with other human beings. It is the ability to set a boundary, clearly, calmly, and without sounding like you're either attacking someone or falling apart. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. But first, let's clear up what a boundary actually is. Because most people have completely the wrong idea, and that wrong idea is exactly what makes boundaries feel so hard. A boundary is not a wall. It is not a punishment. It is not an ultimatum. It is not you being difficult, dramatic, or demanding. A boundary is simply a clear statement of what you will and will not accept, and what you will do if that line is crossed. It is information. It is honest, direct, self-respecting communication about what works for you and what doesn't. That's it. That's all it is. But here's where people get confused. They think setting a boundary is about trying to control the other person's behavior. It isn't. You cannot control what anyone else does. A boundary is about controlling your own response. It says, if this continues, here is what I will do. Not what I will do to you, but what I will do for myself. That distinction is everything, and once you truly understand it, you realize that setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression, it's an act of honesty. So why is it so hard? Because for most people, especially those of us who grew up in environments where keeping the peace was more important than being honest, or where our needs were treated as inconvenient, or where love felt conditional on making other people comfortable, setting a boundary triggers a very deep fear. The fear that if I say no, they won't like me anymore. If I speak up, they'll think I'm too much. If I have needs, I'll push people away. Psychologists call this pattern people-pleasing. And at its core, it's not actually about being kind, it's about being safe. Saying yes when you mean no is a survival strategy, one that might have made perfect sense at some point in your life, but it comes with a cost that compounds over time. Because here is what nobody tells you about people-pleasing. It doesn't protect relationships, it slowly destroys them. Every time you say yes when you mean no, every time you swallow what you actually feel and replace it with what you think the other person wants, a small amount of resentment is deposited somewhere inside you. You might not feel it right away, but it accumulates. And eventually, it reaches a tipping point, and the relationship that you were working so hard to protect by never setting limits explodes, not because of one thing, but because of 1,000 unsaid things that finally found their way out all at once. That explosion is the aggressive version of boundary setting that people are trying to avoid. But avoiding it by never setting any boundaries at all is what creates it in the first place. The two extremes, the eruption and the silence, are actually the same problem from different ends. Both of them come from the same place. The belief that your needs are not allowed to exist. They are. They have always been. And giving yourself permission to have them is the first and most important step in all of this. Now let's talk about how to actually do it. Because the framework matters enormously. The words you choose, the tone you use, the structure of what you say. It's the difference between a boundary that lands cleanly and one that creates more conflict than it resolves. The most effective way to set a boundary is what psychologists call assertive communication. It sits exactly between aggressive, which attacks the other person, and passive, which says nothing. Assertive is clear, calm, and grounded in your own experience rather than an accusation. Here's the structure. 3 simple parts. You describe the specific behavior or situation, not the person's character, not a sweeping judgment, just the specific thing. You describe how it affects you, in terms of your own experience, your own feelings, using I rather than you. And you state clearly what you need going forward. Let me give you a real example. Someone in your life keeps making comments about your choices, your career, your lifestyle, your decisions, in a way that feels dismissive. The aggressive version is, you're so judgmental, you never respect me, you always do this. That puts them on the defense immediately. The conversation becomes about whether they're a bad person rather than about the actual issue. The assertive version is, when you comment on my decisions the way you did earlier, I feel like my choices aren't being respected. I need those conversations to be different going forward. Same situation, completely different impact. You haven't attacked their character. You've described a behavior, named your experience, and stated a need. It's specific, it's honest, and it gives the other person something they can actually work with. Now here's the piece that makes people most anxious. What happens when they push back? Someone sets a boundary. The other person responds with, "You're being too sensitive," or "I was just joking, why are you making this a big deal?" Or, "After everything I've done for you, you're going to make rules now." This pushback is not evidence that your boundary was wrong. It is often evidence that the boundary was needed. Because people who are used to having unlimited access to you, your time, your energy, your patience, will feel the boundary as a loss, and they will resist it, not always maliciously. Sometimes just because change is uncomfortable and they're used to things being a certain way. Your job in that moment is not to defend the boundary endlessly, it's to hold it calmly. You can say, "I understand, this feels different. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just being honest about what works for me." And then you stay quiet. You don't over-explain. You don't apologize for having a need. You don't negotiate your limit away just to make the discomfort stop. Because here's the thing about boundaries that nobody tells you until you've set a few. The discomfort of holding a boundary is almost always less painful than the long-term cost of not having one. The moment you say what you actually mean and stay with it, something inside you shifts. A kind of quiet self-respect that grows each time you choose yourself without cruelty to anyone else. Researcher Brené Brown, whose work on vulnerability and human connection has reached millions of people, says something about this that has stayed with me. She says, "The most compassionate people I have ever interviewed had one thing in common. They were also the most boundaried. Not the most agreeable, not the most accommodating, the most boundaried. Because genuine compassion, the kind that actually sustains relationships over time, requires that you're honest. And honesty sometimes means saying, 'This doesn't work for me.' Not cruelly, not dramatically, just honestly." So here's your action step from this video. Think of one situation in your life right now, just one, where you have been saying yes when you mean no. It doesn't have to be the biggest one, it can be small. And this week, practice the three-part framework just once. The behavior, your experience, your need. Say it calmly, say it clearly, and then let it land without over-explaining. You don't need to become a different person to set a boundary. You just need to trust that your needs are as real and as valid as anyone else's. Because they are. They always have been. This is Lowkey Mind, where quiet people learn that kindness to yourself is not selfishness. It's the foundation of every healthy relationship you'll ever have. Subscribe if this one hit somewhere real. Share it with someone in your life who gives too much and asked for too little. And drop a comment below. Tell me the one area of your life where setting boundaries feels the hardest. I read everything. See you in the next one.